Okay, welcome everybody to our Ops Innovators webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to talk about the 5 ways restaurants secure market share through guest experience. As a reminder, we're going to be recording this session and we'll be sending the recording out tomorrow. So if you'd like to share it with colleagues, you can certainly do so then. And we will also be holding some time at the end for Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the session, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box and we will queue those up for the end of the session and hopefully get to all of your questions. Right now, it's my pleasure to introduce Finley Stockmeyer, who is our Manager of Sales Development. She is with Crunch Time and is going to be leading the session with our fabulous panelists. So Finley, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Cindy. So I wanted to kick this off today by first introducing 2 exceptional leaders in the restaurant space. Cindy, do you want to go to the slide? Oh, so I guess before we do the introduction, I'll just give a quick background on what Crunch Time does and what we're going to be focusing on today. So Crunch Time holistically is a platform driven to support restaurant leaders when it comes to both managing profitability on the inventory and labor side, but also driving consistent customer experience through our LMS and training platform, as well as our operations execution platform called ZenPut. And since the focus of today is capturing market share through driving customer experience, we're really going to hone in on our operations execution platform, ZenPut. And it's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Summers, who is the COO of Cava. Jennifer has extensive experience in the restaurant space, leading tons of transitions and driving restaurant excellence, most recently at Taco Bell before transitioning to Cava. But don't want to steal your thunder, so I'll let you finish introducing yourself.
Oh, thank you, Finley. Excited to be here. Excited to talk about ZenPut and Crunch Time in general. They're definitely strong partners for Cava here. My experience at Taco Bell definitely led into the experience here at Cava, and it's been quite the whirlwind. And I'm excited to answer any questions that you might have about it.
And next up, we have Lucretia Quigley, who has driven a lot of transitions over her time at Panera, driving all the way to being the VP of Growth and Strategy and brand initiatives as well. So Lucretia, do you want to finish introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much. I also am very excited to be here and have the opportunity to chat through how we really leverage platforms like this in our organization. I think it's really exciting to be a part of this and looking forward to the discussion. So thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive in, but I'll go ahead and set the stage first on what we're really here to talk about. I think it's no secret in the restaurant space that it is a very competitive industry. You're driving down the road after work one day and you're hungry or from running errands, and you look to your right and you see 20 options. You look to your left, you see 30 more options. Now, capturing market share and getting that customer to come through your door is tough enough when you don't have that brand recognition. You're a mom and pop shop, but being able to drive a consistent customer experience and pull them in gets even tougher when you have more and more locations to manage. But we have 2 exceptional leaders on the call today who've done that, not just across 20 locations, 50 locations, but really at scale across Cava and Panera. And what we have found is that there are 4 key challenges that really impact the guest experience, which you guys can all see on the screen. And today we're going to cover 5 key strategies in ways that Lucretia and Jennifer have overcome these challenges and the way that they think about capturing market share and getting customers to come through the doors, not just one time, but time and time again. So I guess before we dive into those 5 key strategies, I would be super curious, and I'll open it up here, but Lucretia, do you have experience with some of these challenges, and what's kind of your story behind that?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think just thinking about the industry as a whole, even going back just several years, since COVID, the industry and the landscape has changed a lot. You had COVID, the Great Resignation, and that's really had some long-term impacts on the industry as a whole. I think not even just the service industry, but just across the board. For restaurants specifically, one of the bigger challenges is I think it took a lot of creativity to really execute in that new environment. And as we were working through trying to be creative and in serving our customers, keeping our associates safe, just trying to stay in business, our production systems, the way we did business really changed a lot. I also think, with that change and like I said, the Great Resignation, what also occurred is we lost, for those of us who had restaurants have been open for a long period of time, we lost a lot of knowledge during that time. We lost some of our connection to culture and some of those pieces. So that lack of tenured worker caused a combination of issues and erosion against the overall guest experience. I think for me, most notably would really be around like customer interactions, having those like table touches, being in tune to even like unspoken needs of our customers. I feel like that was kind of a big piece or a big loss. So and that really in and of itself kind of drives a lot of the issues that we're seeing or we're going to be discussing today in terms of the challenge with the guest experience.
Jennifer, what about on your end?
Yeah, so everything that Lucretia said, plus in Kava's situation, we had acquired Zoe's Kitchen back in 2018. At the time, Kava was just shy of about 100 restaurants, and you don't always see a smaller company acquiring a larger company. And so they had over 300 restaurants strong. And so fast forward into COVID, our number one priority was converting those Zoe's over to Kava's. And obviously, scaling that needs to be done in a very smart way. And I'll have to say, a few years ago, we've learned a lot. And so what would happen is we would go into a market, an area, we call it Garden here at Kava, and we'd convert all 10 of the existing restaurants essentially within weeks of each other. And imagine having all these restaurant teams just learning Kava, plus you only have one above restaurant leader. It's chaos, leads to a lot of lessons learned. Thankfully, I can tell you, we no longer open that way, and we're a lot more mindful of pacing and sequencing, bringing in talent earlier, getting them trained up the right way, and providing extra support wherever we do need to go faster. So that was definitely one area where we kept trying to create that better guest experience by being smarter with growing fast. And really the other piece is just about having the right scorecards in place to ensure that we're executing consistently across the system. My team will tell you, I do not like the law of averages. I want to see what percent of restaurants are achieving on the different metrics, because obviously very strong performers can mask the underperformers, and we need to make sure that we're consistently executing across the brand to create that great guest experience.
So I think there's something here that you both touched on. Lucretia, you mentioned that when COVID happened, you had to really reset the standards and really reset the culture. And Jennifer, I imagine that when you converted these Zoe's Kitchens to Kava, you weren't just flipping on the light and say, okay, great, now go run a Kava, right? You had to also reset the standards and reset the culture at those restaurants as well. And I think this is actually a really good transition into our first kind of key strategy, but how to stand out in a crowded market. And as we think about culture and standards, I think we can all agree that those two are not separate. The standards are what drive our culture, and culture is embedded in the standards. So as you think about standards slash SOPs and culture, what is the connection between those two? Like Jennifer, from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, number one, it's hard to do that in a meaningful way where your restaurant in California is speaking the same language as your restaurant in Texas, New York City. And so it starts with hiring the right people who truly embrace your brand's mission and values and exhibit the behaviors or competencies that you believe is important. You know, I reflect on our chief people officer here, Kelly Costanza. She's always saying how culture doesn't just happen overnight. You have to operationalize it, which clearly as an operator, that's music to my ears. So I'm like, give me the blueprint and I'll go execute it. And so as a result, we literally weave in our mission, values, and competencies, we call it here MVC for short, into the entire employee life cycle, from hiring to onboarding, training, development, succession planning. And our ratings are also tied to these competencies or behaviors that we want everyone to embrace. On the flip side, we're also extremely intentional about driving programs and launching them that will create a lot of engagement and excitement around MVC. And so, for example, a couple of years ago, we launched our Competency Champions training program where we took kind of the best general managers out there and above restaurant leaders who truly embody MVC. We bring them all to a centralized location, train them, shower them with recognition, with some swag, of course, as everyone loves. And then we send them out to their individual gardens and regions, and they end up training all the teams around the different competencies that we have to ensure that we're exhibiting those behaviors in our restaurants. Now, you mentioned how you drive standards and link it to culture. And so for us in the tactical every day, it's really all about the ZenPut platform. It really ties those checklists to our mission and values. And you guys are probably saying, how in the world do we do that? Well, when we have the tasks that we have them do, we end up linking on why it's so important for them to get it done and how it ladders up eventually to our mission. So as a little minor example, in our food safety checklist, we talk about making sure that we have gloves of all sizes. And the reason we want gloves of all sizes is we want everyone to be able to put a glove on and have it feel comfortable and safe. And so it's kind of that linkage of we want to be inclusive of everyone and make everyone feel comfortable. I don't know if that helps to answer the question.
It does. It does. It sounds like Kava does a really good job from the minute that someone's going through the interview process. You're already embedding what your standards and your culture are so that it's no surprise when they start the job on day one, right? They've already got that mindset and then they're starting to execute on it within those processes that you have them do on like a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
Lucretia, what about from your perspective? What is the connection between SOPs, day-to-day routines, and kind of your brand's values?
I think Jennifer hit on it, and the most important thing in our organization is people first. And it does. It starts from the moment that we start having interactions with them at the hiring process, all the way through training, ongoing training, and a lot of, continued discussion. But I think the most important piece is being very consistent in the discussion and how the standards tie into your core values. It's through interactions that we have with our associates. It's through not only the interactions that we're having every day, every shift. It's how we exemplify them as managers, and not just at the cafe level, but also in the support center setting. And then also, I think, and Jennifer covered it very well, but I also think one of the things that we do that is really important to this is sharing real life examples of how we bring our values or our brand promise to life and celebrating that. We do that through something we call a Panera Hug Pin. So our associates are getting specially recognized through the utilization of that hug pin. And it's a very kind of like coveted prize, comes from customer recognition, from our executive team, our COO, sharing that with an associate who really exemplifies both of those things. And then some of the other pieces I would say is just bringing it to life through having this visible, our brand promise displayed in every bakery cafe. And it's always serving as a reminder of like our mission and why it matters and how it connects back to what we do each and every day in preparation for each of our shifts and each of our interactions with our customers.
I think that's so important because if it's out of sight, then it's out of mind. So I love that you have it kind of front and center, serving as a reminder. And I think you both hit on a really valuable point of not just putting processes in place, but helping everyone understand why X is a certain value of your brand or why we have a certain process or a certain standard. Because when people understand that why, they can get in the boat and execute on it. Whereas if they don't understand the why, then it's just a process and we're just getting work done for the sake of getting work done. And I think people really want to understand the impact that their work has. And it sounds like you both do a really good job of making sure everyone understands that why and the larger impact to the customer experience and probably even their own experience too.
Absolutely.
As we transition into our second strategy, kind of how we're talking about guest experience, I would be super curious. How do you, some of those like operational issues that we looked at prior to this kicking off, diving into the 5 strategies, but how do you kind of look at what's happening in the restaurant? Where are the issues? And how do you fix that before it actually impacts the guest experience? And I'll kick it off with you, Lucretia.
Great. Yeah, I think the first most important piece of this is just ensuring that you have strong operational standards and you set clear expectations around how important they are. I think one of the other things that can happen in our field is that op standards aren't always clear and really simple to execute. And that's another really important piece of this. And then beyond that, I think in order to set that foundation, you really need to have an excellent training process that sets clear expectations on how and when you execute. I think the next piece of that is the tool systems and structure behind it that would really support it. So in Panera, we take a multi-pronged approach to this. So first and foremost, our above cafe leaders utilize something called a high impact cafe visit so that we're all viewing and looking at our bakery cafes in the same way. It is a tool in Zenput, but it really keeps us focused on how we view the customer experience, how we view our associates' experience in the cafe. And that ties directly to what our managers and associates are doing every shift, every day, every week, month, quarter, through our digital manager handbook. And then just to follow up, to ensure those things are happening on a daily basis, we have something that we call our brand standards review that comes in and validates that we're executing against the goals that we've set in place. So I think a very important piece of that as well is just ensuring that we're all focused on the same thing. Language is consistent across all of the systems. And then this system is, not only validated like through real-time reporting, but it's also connected to our support center. So like you said, if there's an issue happening, we can get in front of it before it has a big impact on the organization. But most importantly, we really empower our market leaders to take action. Obviously there's a lot of monitoring happening, through scorecarding and other accountabilities to keep that first, like first in mind. But being great at operations is just, to me, it's about keeping it simple, being clear, repeatable, and understanding what their requirements are and allowing them to act and then reevaluate and follow up very quickly. So
I think that's a winning combination, having something that's simple and easy to execute, but is called a high impact visit, something that drives a lot of impact, but is, to your point, like simple and easy to execute. Jennifer, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Lucretia said it really well, and we do a lot of the same things. You know, it's whatever platform you use. Like for us, it's Zenput. We make sure that all the right checklists are in there. They're time bound too. So there's certain checklists where you have to get done by a certain amount of time. And if you don't get it done, it shows up as incomplete. And if you show up as incomplete regularly, it becomes a sounding alarm of we've got some issues going on in that restaurant and let's get in there. We're also in the middle of launching our ops playbook for the above restaurant leaders. And so that will live in Zenput as well to make sure that we're focused on the right things during our visits. Something a little different because we also use Crunch Time. Crunch Time gives us a dashboard that gives us basically in the hour an update on how sales and labor are progressing. And so we have a real-time view both in restaurants and above restaurants of how we're executing on those shifts. You know, where are sales much higher than expected and we don't have enough people staffed up? Can we call people in to help get after those shifts? Or conversely, you know, when we go through some major holiday seasons, where are sales a little bit softer? And so we need to make sure that we're managing labor the right way.
So it sounds like the key thing for you is having that real-time data to be able to make decisions in the moment proactively versus, not being able to make decisions in the moment and having it be a lost cause. I would be super curious because you both mentioned you're using Zenput for various things such as high impact audits, brand standards, assessments, kind of day-to-day routines. What was life like before Zenput, and how were you kind of tackling issues before it impacted customer experience before rolling out Zenput?
I was
I'll go.
part of
Go
Kava
ahead, Jenny.
before then, so thankfully I didn't have to witness that.
On our end, we had a lot of inconsistencies in approach in the cafes. I think it happens occasionally where different leaders have maybe their own way of doing things, way of doing visits, or like approaching discussions with operations. And that caused a lot of inconsistencies in our overall operation. And what we were able to do specifically through like a high impact visit is we were able to get everybody all on the same page, all focused on the same thing, and we could quickly move on issues that we see, whether it's a small operational issue like coffee temperature, maybe it's not hitting, or maybe like a broader customer focus that we might have. We're able to communicate and impact operations through that visit form. We also have a really fast way of popping up quick communications to our cafe managers as well through the use of Zenput and our digital manager handbook. So it's really just created a speedy way for us to get information out. And it's also real-time data that we can quickly follow up on and see, who's seen it, who hasn't, who's executing it, and what some quick real-time results are.
Awesome. So overall, it sounds like night and day from pre-Zenput and like kind of post-Zenput. And that's all really to kind of fix issues before they impact the customer experience. But I'd also be really curious to understand like how you keep them coming back and how you actually build that brand advocacy across like your employees. Because you both mentioned really excellent ways in which you drive recognition, you drive the values and instill them across the day-to-day things that they're doing, how they function, how they greet customers. So I guess like if I start off with you, Jennifer, I would be curious, like how are you kind of building that brand advocacy across like the employees?
Yeah, I mean, two of our values are passion for positivity and generosity first always. And so we want to make sure we're creating that kind of atmosphere throughout all our team members, whether in the support center or in any restaurant. And so, a few of the different things that we employ, one, we regularly recognize our teams when visiting the restaurants with values cards. So Lucretia has the hug pin. We have different cards that say a specific value, and then we write a little message on the back about how they're exemplifying that value. The best card to get is the champion card because it means you exhibit every single value and you do an amazing job. We have quarterly general manager calls where we recognize not only the best, but also the most improved. I can tell you, I've been in situations in my past life where I've just wanted a high five for being able to continue to move the needle and make the improvements. And then we also have MVC winners every quarter. And the MVC winner can be an hourly team member, can be a general manager, above restaurant leader. They get nominated, and then eventually we vote on who that winner will be. And then they get to come to the next town hall and experience the collaboration center that we have here in DC and a few other bells and whistles. We also launched our first general manager conference back in 22, where we invite all our general managers to a centralized location, shower them, praise them, recognize them. And then most recently, we just had our last general manager conference in May, and we announced that we're going to move from having yearly general manager conferences to biannual conferences, because in between, we want to take the top of the top and take them out to Greece to really experience the warm Mediterranean sun, the hospitality, and just help them get back to the roots of how Cava was created. And then just separately from the showering of recognition, I mean, we all know our team members just want to feel heard and feel that they're also helping to make a difference with the brand. So we require every support center team member to do a shoulder to shoulder program in the field. And they spend a few hours on the line. They get to know the teams get to hear what's rolling out soon, but then also they're expected to bring back tangible projects for us to work on that's really going to create an even better experience for them. And then I personally make sure that I have, I create a Cava council every year. We bring someone else onto this council, and it's usually comprised of 10 to 15 people in the field. And they come in, they give us ideas, but they're also involved in the beginning and projects that we want to roll out so they can put their blueprint blueprint, if you will, on it. And so we get a lot of engagement and excitement around that.
That's incredible. Greece, by the way, are you guys hiring? Just out of curiosity. No, but what I heard you say, and I think this is really important, is that you not only look to kind of advocate and recognize people that you directly work with that report to you, but field team members, GMs, all the way down to hourly employees. The 17-year-old kid that's working really hard through their summer job or picks up some extra shifts during the holiday season. Like, it sounds like you're being very intentional about how do we not just recognize the top general managers that are running the show at each store, but also the team members that they oversee too, so that everyone feels empowered, everyone feels like their work matters, and it's kind of that positive reinforcement too. Lucretia, I would be curious from your perspective, how at Panera are you guys not just recognizing general managers and, excellent field leaders, but really driving that down to some of the more like hourly workers, giving them shout outs and kind of the recognition where you feel it could be impactful too?
Yeah, I think, building that culture of like that deep brand love and that connection to the organization, it's super important. And we definitely love to celebrate our associates too. And I love Jen's passion. I think we all get really excited, especially when we do get to celebrate, you know, the associates that are making it happen each and every day in the field. Some of the fun stuff we like to do on top of, you know, the hug pin, we also have thank you card, and we have something we call the Panera Way, and it's about all about our culture and how we treat each other. So we do have little pins associated with each one of the different aspects of the Panera Way. So if they own it, or we're winning together, or some of those pieces, we have the opportunity to really highlight that in the cafe, handwritten note in that moment, much like what Jen's doing over at Kava. I think just taking a minute to do that and celebrating associates in front of their peers for a job well done, it goes a long way. Some of the other things we do, we have like the social media kind of type platform that we use. It's called Beekeeper. It's very similar to like a Facebook, I suppose. And all the team members are connected to it, and they have the opportunity, and our leaders do a really good job of this, to celebrate each other, celebrate milestones, celebrate, you know, like we had an awesome shift today and our speed of service was, you know, better than expected. And to be able to comment cafe to cafe. So that has been a huge thing for us as well. And then, you know, we definitely do a few other things with our GMs and above cafe, but I think, you know, I really love the programs that we have in place and what we do to recognize just the team every day in the bakery cafes.
That's great. I would be, as a follow-up to that, I would be curious, like, how do you see pouring into your kind of like team members in that way? Like, how do you see that impact how they may treat like customers, or how does that impact like the customer experience?
I think the way you treat your team translates into how they then treat the customers and have each interaction with the customers. I think if they're not happy, you know, it's a very obvious thing when you walk into the cafe. It's like it's a vibe you feel. So you know, that's why it's always people first. And kind of the rest falls into place if you have that right person.
So I guess as we transition to kind of our fourth strategy on how to capture market share by driving excellent customer experience, I think it's very apparent that when a store is operationally ready to receive customers, there's a difference than the stores that aren't operationally ready to receive customers. So, Lucretia, I would be curious from your point of view, what are the steps that you and the Panera team takes to make sure that a shift is customer ready?
We have many processes in place. I mentioned earlier that we have the Zenput platform. We call it our Zenput daily agenda. It's a timed readiness checklist to ensure that we have everything in place to be able to provide service that our customers come to expect. I think it's just really vital to the guest experience that we utilize these tools. We ensure that they're in place. That, you know, you've walked into a restaurant, I'm sure, plenty of times, and you could feel, I go back to the vibe, but you can really feel like if a cafe is running as it should be, or if we're having like any issues within the cafe. So these readiness checklists just ensure that, you know, we're ready to serve every customer, each and every transaction, to not only you know, do a great job, but we're really building trust every single time, you know, and hitting that customer expectation.
When it comes to some of those expectations and building trust, you mentioned that like these checklists are in place to really make sure that they're ready for customers. And you mentioned when you go into a store and it's not ready, the vibe's kind of off. But what are those expectations that the customer has that you need to make sure the shift is ready for?
Yeah, I think there's some just like table stakes, I guess, like as a customer, you walk in and you expect a clean environment. And some of obviously the checklists that we have really drive that. You expect that there's going to be the menu item or the product available that you want to order. So there's a lot of validation around, do we have the proper products? Are they labeled appropriately? Do they have the right, are they at the right temperatures? Do we have enough backups? And then most importantly, there's validation points that we have the ability to provide great service to those customers. So it's really going through and validating associate touch points as well. So it's really a mix of like your product, your environment, and ensuring that you have the ability to provide great service.
Those, one more follow-up question for you, but those validation and touch points, like how do you embed that into the standards that they're kind of executing on so that you can actually ensure they're actually doing the work and they're actually ready, and you're not just looking at it from an above perspective where you think they did it, but you can't actually validate because you're not at the store?
Yeah, so we got a little creative with how we set up different questions like within ZenPut. So some of the things we did were, yes, there's going to be a yes or no question, here and there, but there's also some other ways that we validate. So it might be like taking a picture or answering a specific question, just some variety there so we can see some validation points. And there's other ways behind the scenes, just looking at like timing and, how long you would expect something to take to be completed that you can also validate as an above cafe user, within the platform.
Okay. Jennifer, from your side, like what role does shift readiness kind of play into customer experience? And are you guys doing anything a little bit differently at Kava, or what kind of steps are you taking?
Yeah, I mean, shift readiness it's paramount, right? We're in the fast casual space, which means people are oftentimes looking for something fast, but with great food. And so what Lucretia said, if we don't have the right number of team members working, they're not deployed the right way, or we don't have the food on the line, it's going to create that negative experience. And if that continues to happen, then obviously we'll start to lose more and more guests in the long run. And so, in addition to everything Lucretia said, I think, we launched a new labor and deployment model at the end of last year, which showcases based off volumes for peak periods, how many people you should have in restaurant, where you should be staffing them during peaks, and then what their secondary tasks are whenever there aren't as many guests in the restaurant. And so you can then clearly see when the restaurant is ready, they've got the right people, they're deployed the right way, and that means they've set up their shifts the right way. And more recently, we've also launched a couple scorecards that help to showcase, not to get too technical, but our actual labor hours versus our earned based off of the sales. It's a little bit in the past, obviously, not real time, but it gives a good, clear indicator on where we continually understaffed compared to the hours that we should have been using and where we're overstaffed. And, you link that with the guest experience, and it tells a pretty good story about whether or not that team is consistently not staffing the right way.
So from your side, it's a mixture of deploying the right amount of people to meet that demand, but also making sure they're executing on the work that sets them up for success, regardless of the amount of people that they have.
Exactly.
Okay. And you hinted on something earlier, but I'd love to pull on that thread. Like, how is like driving consistency and shift readiness? Like, how does that play into the theme of today, like capturing market share and kind of that build of long-term growth? Because you hinted at earlier, if we aren't ready, we kind of, that erodes the trust and we lose customers over time. So as you're starting to think about long-term growth, like how does this play into that long-term growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly why we created those scorecards recently that link the guest experience and the peak hour execution. I mean, that's when most of our guests are coming into our restaurants. And so it's the greatest likelihood if we create a terrible experience that we will lose market share to other competitors out there. And so how do we make sure that people know what they're doing? And then as mentioned, like they know what their primary task is and where they need to be in place. But then depending on the flow of guests, what they're doing as their secondary job and having those guardrails, if you will, in place really helps for the execution. But I mean, it all comes down to the human connection, right? Everyone wants human connection today, and you need the right team to be able to deliver that. And the right team to deliver that means you have the right team members. They know what they're doing, they're trained the right way, they know what they're supposed to be executing, and it will create that exceptional experience for the guests and keep them coming back for more.
So there's something there, and I think it's a good segue into our last strategy. But you mentioned that, delivering a good customer experience and having people want human connection, like they want to feel that when they come into your restaurant. So I think that's a big part of the equation. The other part is having an excellent product. If you can nail the people experience and the product, that's, I would argue, probably a really big portion of that equation that keeps a customer coming back. So and food quality is one of the hardest things to get consistent because you have different people making what's supposed to be the same item in the same way with the same amount of ingredients, right? At the same temperature. And you have to do that not just at one location, but you have to do that across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of locations, regardless if I'm in California one day and I go to one of your locations, or I'm in Texas the next day. I, as the customer, expect to have the same exact product, same exact people experience, same exact experience overall. So, what tools are you using? Lucretia, I'll pass this to you first, but what tools are you using to ensure that like every order is made the right way every time across every location?
Yeah, I think there's basically 3 different types of tools or systems that we have in place to get this done. First and foremost, it's obviously like descriptions around like how you're receiving product, what the standards are, kind of bringing the product in and having like a process for that. In as well as having appropriate tools to ensure like we are building consistent or executing consistently in terms of how we're prepping items. And then another really big aspect of it is, having thousands of restaurants, having a production core that flows in an appropriate way, in a way that goes from where the food is prepped to where the food is delivered. So it's also very important that each step throughout that process is very clear, simple, easy to execute is a very big thing for us. And that the activity that is completed along the way is consistent. And we're doing that piece of it through our kitchen display systems, so we've got some very clear guidance on those kitchen display systems that help each team member. It doesn't matter what area of the country you're in, it's going to display the same thing to ensure like the build and the quality of the product is the same. So I think it's a multitude of different tools and systems that all come together to make the kitchen flow really well.
I would agree. Based on what you said, it sounds like you've not only vetted out some really excellent tools to help build that workflow, but you've really gone in and identified like how can we make this workflow seamless? Jennifer, what about from your side?
A lot of the same things that Lucretia said. I think, one thing I'm lucky to have here at Cava is, Ted Xenohristos is one of our founders, and he's our chief concept officer who also leads the culinary team. And so we have a very strong partnership, which has really helped to make sure that wherever we can simplify the food, we are simplifying the food. And wherever we don't want to compromise the quality, then we find other ways to execute it in a way that's more manageable and we can do it consistently across the system. So as like a little bit of a background with him and his friends from Greece, that's where they grew up. And so they created 4 full service restaurants here in the DC area. Phenomenal restaurants. They continue to open more. Highly suggest you trying it out. But then they partnered with Brett Schulman, who's our CEO, to open our fast casual locations. And, you know, because of his experience in fine dining, and he's a chef by trade, you know, he understands the quality of the food and what we need to have out there, but he also understands managing a restaurant and that you need to be able to execute against it. And so, you know, together we've been able to partner with simplifying our recipe cards, finding optimal equipment for us to be able to execute something more easily. Like right now we slice our cucumbers. And so we're now looking at, is there a slicer that's a lot easier to use to be able to do that in our restaurants? And, you know, I joke with the teams a lot where even a few years ago, we used to cut our onions, we used to cut our pita crisps from the large pitas that we'd receive. And now those are all coming into the restaurant pre-cut. And so again, being very mindful of where we can take out any kind of user error in the experience and make it easier for our team members.
I think 10 years from now, you're both gonna have a ton of stories that you can tell new team members of. Well, back in my day, we used to do this manually and this manually. But it sounds like you guys have made a lot of positive changes to removing a lot of that kind of manual labor to drive efficiency and simplify the experience for all of your team members.
Definitely.
So to kind of wrap it up, before we move into the Q&A, I'd be curious to hear from both of you if you have any other insights or advice you can share for turning operational standards into consistent routines that capture market share and drive a consistent customer experience.
I can go first. I mean, I would say, you know, even a few years ago, I'm not sure that the restaurant space really embraced technology to the level that it's at today. And so continuing to think forward, especially with newer generations. I mean, I have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old at home, and they know how to operate my iPhone so easily, like probably better than I do. And so having to think through the lens of, as we have new generations coming into our restaurants, how do we create an environment where it's natural for them, it's easy for them, at the same time being mindful of other people that are in the restaurant as well, and how do we showcase how to use the new technology and how it'll make everything more efficient and easier for them so they can repurpose their time to the guests. And then the last piece is just data. I can't say it enough how important it is to make sure that you've got the right data that helps you to really understand where you have issues. I mean, obviously Lucretia's brand is a whole lot bigger than where we are today. And so, you know, the field leaders out there can't go to thousands of restaurants. So they have to manage that through the data and understand where's their attention most needed.
Yeah, I really love that, Jen. And I think from my perspective, data is super important. It's also important to have the right amount of data because at times, like as we start to bring technologies on, one of the things I've seen in my time is that we get into the whole analysis paralysis kind of thing. So you can have a report for this and we need a report for this and, you know, all of those things. But I think like your team does, getting very focused on the most important things is really the best approach to it. Don't let yourself get buried in too much data. And I think the second piece, and you mentioned being aware of everybody that's in the restaurant. I think data technology, it's really great, but there's also a balance of it, like real in person, something in your hand. along with, you know, the technology and support of, you talked a lot about opening new bakery cafe or new restaurants. You know, we open a lot of new bakery cafes as well. And we find that, you know, a good balance of tools to train in different environments or to support different activities in the restaurant is really important. So I would say those two things are some big learnings I've had over the years.
That's excellent, excellent advice. And I think with all of the advice both of you have shared today, our listeners have a ton of takeaways that they can either implement with their current processes, help them game plan for what they're going to tackle in 2026 as they look to new technology or just new internal processes in general. So thank you both so much for all of the advice that you've brought to our listeners today. And I'll go ahead and kick it over to Cindy, who is on our marketing team and will lead our Q&A session.
Well, thank you all for such a fantastic session. We do have quite a few questions coming in. And as a reminder, if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and drop that in the Q&A chat, and hopefully we'll get to it. But let's go ahead and get started. And Finley, I'll let you just decide who you want to answer each of these as we go through. So the first question, internally, we talk about how execution trumps acquisition, meaning that flawless execution leads to net new acquisitions. What have you found to be your biggest impediments to achieving and exceeding order accuracy and timely order execution?
I think I would give this one to Lucretia because you talked about all of the workflows that you guys have in place in your kitchens to create that kind of seamless experience and get orders out in a prompt time.
Yeah, I think a couple things go into this. I think from a speed of service perspective, it's all about shift readiness. I mean, it even backs up to being prepared for the week, right? Getting the right orders in, ensuring you have the right schedule written. Jen talked a lot about deployment of associates and making sure like they're all in the right places to get that work done and properly serve customers during peak hour. I think accuracy is an interesting one. I think if you're in the cafe and I'm taking your order on the POS and I'm handing you your order across the expo counter and you're sitting in my restaurant, I can be pretty darn accurate, and I have a way to resolve, like if you're missing a spoon, I can get that to you immediately and you feel like you've had a really great and accurate experience. I think what's been interesting over the last couple of years is the introduction of all the different channels that we have. So at Panera, we have like mobile pickup in the drive-thru. We have something called rapid pickup off the shelf that you can come get. You can also place an order on a kiosk, or you can, you know, essentially come in and place a to-go order. So I think that the trick is the efficiencies in the line to ensure that you have like redundancies and backup checks for all of the different platforms. And then there's also steps of service that you have to take into consideration because orders are picked up at different times. And unfortunately, every order preparation cannot be exactly the same, especially if you have like a beverage with a menu item. You don't want your beverage sitting there. You want it completed when the customer arrives. So there's a little bit of complexity layered into the steps of service. And I think that's where we get hung up sometimes. But the key, and I'm not saying, you know, we don't have room for improvement in this area, because we always do. Accuracy is always one of the biggest focuses that we have. But the key is ensuring that you have that strong operational, like that training and that consistent follow-up, and just making sure you're talking about it at peak, staying all over it.
That's great.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Lucretia.
Okay.
Jen, I've got one for you, especially because you said you don't want to see the averages. You want to see which are the restaurants that are top performing and which are the ones that are bottom performing. But one of the listeners asked a question that says, how do you address an underperforming location? For example, they're not following the procedures. They're following their own procedures that weren't approved, trained and expected. Like they're just not following the way that you would want them to do them. And it sounds like they've actually created their own processes. Like, how do you kind of address that? Plus, how do you address underperforming stores in general?
Yeah. Oh, in so many ways, but you always assume positive intent. And so you go out there to understand what is going on in this restaurant. Is it that you truly have an underperforming leader who wants to do their own thing? Or is it that you have a leader who is drowning and hasn't been trained the right way and hasn't been set up with the tools to be successful? The same thing goes to our garden level or area level, where you might have someone that is just trying to make ends meet and they don't know what they don't know. And so I think number one is you need to understand what the root cause is. Is it a people issue because of training, or the wrong hire? The wrong hire, I think everyone knows what to do with that. And the people in the training situation, then it's deciding, okay, what do they need help with? What do we need to train them on? Who do we pair them with? Who's exceptional in that area that they can spend time with in the market with them to help turn things around? Oftentimes, I would say any what we call outlier gardens or outlier restaurants, majority of the time, they don't always have the right team. They might have a very good general manager in place, but then they don't have strong shift leaders in place. And so when the GM is not in the restaurant, then things go sideways. And so number one, it's making sure you've got the right people, making sure you're training them the right way. And once you've done that, for me, if I've checked those two boxes and a restaurant continues to underperform or a garden continues to underperform, you've got a different situation on your hands. And then you need to start thinking about leveling up the team.
I like that. I once had someone tell me, look at the process first and not the person. And I think that that aligns with kind of at a high level aligns with everything that you just said. Lucretia, I've got another question for you, and I think you're actually the perfect person to answer this because it's a question about the franchise model. And I know the way that Panera rolled out Zenput, it was more of like kind of a top-down approach. You guys rolled it out brand wide across every franchisee. So this question, first of all, it says, these are great insights. So kudos to both of you. But this person said, I can see the pros and cons of being in the franchise model. You know, I'd love to know your thoughts in how you roll out an effective operational excellence standard within a franchise model and getting that buy-in from franchisees.
That's a big question. And and every franchisee is different. But I think what's most important is and at least what we do now. So we've been franchising for 30 plus years now. And unfortunately I wasn't there when we started, but right now, what we do is we partner very closely with our franchisees. It's very important because they run a significant portion of our business. We're about 50% franchise, so they have a significant portion of our cafes, and they have a lot of experience in restaurant operations, not only Panera but others. So there's a wealth of knowledge out there. So first and foremost, we definitely partner as we're working through new operational standards. And what our organization really attempts to do is take a franchise first approach and how we can really build up on some of the basics, because the way we do franchising, there's some flexibility in, what brand standards are. Maybe it's across people or how they manage loss prevention or like some of those other things that company doesn't necessarily dictate. So I think it's the franchise first mentality and also a clear partnership. And then finally, when we're bringing a new process or procedure forward, it's very important to make sure that it just makes sense and it's simple, clear, and easy to execute across the board.
If I can just add on to that, because I've also seen groups, like various franchise groups, roll out various products over my past like 6 or 7 years. But I think there's a couple of other approaches that groups sometimes take in addition to what you mentioned, Lucretia. Like when you're a smaller brand that maybe is in the infancy or emerging stages, like 20, 30 locations, there's usually one franchisee that can give like sound advice in terms of technology. So partnering really closely with that franchisee to get their perspective. But when you grow into a larger brand, sometimes that incorporates a franchise advisory council where maybe there's like 4 or 5 franchisees, building kind of like an internal business case with them to get their support, get their buy-in. And then once they're bought in, they're telling all their franchisee friends about it. And all of a sudden everyone's bought in and they're like, when can we roll this out? So I think there's various ways I've seen franchise groups tackle this, but I also think it's one and the same with corporate groups like Kava. Like Jennifer, when you're rolling out something, I'm sure it's not a decision that you're making on your own, but you're looking to get support from your field team, you know, general managers that you think give really great advice on technology too. So it does sound like it's kind of like really including everyone in that process.
It's definitely that. And I will say, even when I was at Taco Bell, I mean, it was making sure that your franchisees felt as like true partners, and they were in it from the get-go, and they understand the value for them to be more open to making those big ticket purchases.
Okay, well, we have gotten back to the top of the hour. So thank you all for so much for these fantastic insights. I think this is a terrific webinar. And for the audience, please feel free to go ahead and download the ebook on the same topic if you want to learn more. And thank you again. We will be sending out the recording tomorrow, so watch for that if you'd like to share it with other folks in the organization.